But I got to tell you, the marching band is the way to most certainly connect with every member of that community on a very regular basis. And if marching band is too much, well, then maybe give up some of those competitions. Maybe look at how you're programming marching band to make it doable for you and your students. But why would we want to give up that connective opportunity for our program?
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Everything Band, a podcast that features conversations with composers, conductors, and performers of music for winds and percussion. My name is Mark Connor. I'm a composer and educator, and each week I have the good fortune to speak with and share the stories and wisdom of musicians and leaders in the band community. Are you planning to travel with your group sometime soon? If so, please consider my sponsor, Kaleidoscope Adventures, a full-service tour company specializing in student group travel. With a former educator as its CEO, Kaleidoscope Adventures is dedicated to changing student lives through travel, and they offer high-quality service and an attention to detail that comes from more than 25 years of student travel experience. Trust Kaleidoscope's outstanding staff to focus on your group's one-of-a-kind adventure so that you can focus on everything else. The Everything Band podcast is a proud member of the Music Teachers Development Podcast Network. The Muted Network provides support in the form of audio-on-demand programming designed by and for music educators. You can find more information about our network at mutedpodcasts.com. Before we begin, I'd like to thank all of you for listening. I appreciate your time and hope that you are finding value from these interviews. I rely on word of mouth and social media to bring the show to new listeners. If you think you knew one or two people who might find these interviews useful, please let them know about it. You can also help by following me and sharing posts on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. Remember, help your students live up to the best that is in them through music. And now on to my next guest, Robert W. Smith. Hi, Robert.
Hi, Mark. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Just fine. Thank you.
So, Robert, I don't know if you need to introduce yourself necessarily to my listeners, but why don't you go ahead and tell the listeners who you are and why you're on the show?
Well, thank you. First off, it's an honor and a pleasure to be here. My name is Robert W. Smith. I am a teacher, I am a composer, and I am a publisher.
Yes. So, Robert, now, you and I, just for the listeners to know, we have a relationship. You publish some of my music, so there is that's in the background here. So just to be transparent with everyone here. But the first thing I want to know is I want to try to talk about your early years. So what's your origin story? How'd you get started in music when you were a kid?
I had a somewhat of an unusual upbringing. A lot of it had to do with my father's military career. I was born at Fort Rucker, Alabama. My father he was born and grew up in upstate New York and then made his way to eastern Pennsylvania, Bethlehem, Allentown. And as I tell people, if I say Bethlehem as opposed to Bethlehem, then you know I've got roots in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. So he joined the Army and got stationed at Fort Rucker, Alabama, met my mother, who was a local girl. And they got married. A couple of years later, I showed up, and so I was born in a military hospital. Wasn't very long before we were off to Europe, and I actually spent 4 years of my very early years living about 80 kilometers outside of Paris. There was a military base there called Poste d'Ivalaine. It's near Bar-le-Duc, Toul, Nancy, those little towns. And it was a really wonderful experience. And the older I get in life, I really realize what a major gift that was to me, particularly when it came down to having a very worldly view, or what I think is a worldly view, and also changed the way even I raise my daughters. From there, my father taught in the flight school, so we went back to Fort Rucker. And I spent the rest of my youth there in Fort Rucker, Alabama. That's in the southeastern corner. And my mother's from Daleville, and Daleville literally is just outside the gate of Fort Rucker. So I started playing piano. My mother and grandmother both played keyboard piano. My grandmother was that organist that played in the Southern Baptist Church for 40 plus years. Just an amazing woman, and it was always fascinating to me to watch her play, watch my mother play. I really, really just wanted to play music. This was at an extremely young age. There was an amazing teacher there in town in Daleville, Joan Marchman. is her name, and she would take me when I was 5 years old. She'd take me at 5. So my mother marched me up there on my 5th birthday. I knocked on the door and said I'd like to take some lessons, and that started my formal music training. From there, took piano all the way through my youth and educational years, and then joined the band when I was in 5th grade. Started playing the trumpet, and life changed instantly. I like to joke with people. It's almost a Wizard of Oz moment. My world went from black and white into color the day I joined the band, and it was a wonderful, wonderful experience. From there, college, and on into career.
What was it about that 5th grade experience that you mentioned that your world turned into color? In what way? How did that happen? Was it a teacher? Was it just the experience of playing with other kids? What was it?
That's a great question. I think I came into the beginning band with maybe a little bit more perspective than some of those that were around me. Specifically, Joan Marchman, this wonderful, wonderful piano teacher, didn't just teach me piano. She was teaching music theory. I like to joke, I maybe could have passed the final exam for my college freshman theory 101 class. I maybe could have passed that in my single-digit years. She was that good of a teacher. And I'm not speaking about me, I'm talking about her specifically, and my reverence and respect for her and her teaching methods. It was really fascinating with her and her approach to theory. And then also having me write. And I began composing simple little melodies first, but I just began composing. And she would have me write it in my little sketchbook and whatnot. So when I went to the band, I came in with a somewhat of a composer's ear, and then to hear all the timbral colors in the band, literally the world opened up for me.
Yeah, that's amazing. So I'm really interested in trying to distill some of this wisdom from these master teachers. Is there anything that you can remember specifically that maybe band directors can use from her technique of teaching you theory and encouraging you to create at that age?
She was so gifted in her approach. She did a few things for me. One, like every pianist, you're sitting there and you're working on things like scales. Well, I just didn't use scales from a muscle memory. I didn't memorize scales. She actually taught me what a major scale was and how it's used. She taught me that that scale was a vocabulary set. It was something that we use to communicate with other people. And thus, if you really understood a major scale, you can start on any note, any pitch, and create a major scale from there. So it was not a matter of me memorizing scales. It was a matter of me almost, let's use a guitar analogy, I was almost using a mental capo and just moving up and down the keyboard. That was really fascinating. She taught me minor scales, and from there we moved into modes. So it was so wonderful to have these amazing vocabulary sets introduced to me at a very, very young age. And then for me to actually start composing with those vocabulary sets. I thought that was fascinating. Another amazing thing she did for me was also to connect and put into context what I was doing. One of my prized possessions is in one of my music books. She actually, at the end of a lesson, she took out a pen and she wrote my teaching tree. And I studied with her, and she studied with Violet Irvin. And Violet Irvin studied here, and it went back, and we went and looked at the generations of teachers. And my teaching tree goes back to Beethoven's in my teaching tree, as an example. It goes back to names that are very well known. And so who knows what little glimmer or what little nugget was passed down that I was able to receive. And it really made it very clear to me that not only music, but music education is a very, very special gift that we have to pass on with great care. We have to nurture the generations, our future generations. And that concept has stayed with me my entire career.
I love the idea that we're passing on something that's greater than ourselves, the standing on the shoulders of giants kind of idea.
Absolutely.
Yeah, my composition teacher in college was Czech, so I go back to Dvorak in mine.
Oh, how about that?
It's a little bit humbling to think in those terms, though, right?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, but it's also it's humbling, but it's a very positive thing to recognize that we are simply just keepers of a flame, an eternal musical flame that is burned for many centuries, and will hopefully, if we do and keep the flame bright, hopefully we can pass it on and keep that flame moving. So it shows how significant our responsibility is, but how insignificant we are in the grand scheme of things.
Right, right. So you mentioned that you started on trumpet in fifth grade.
Yes.
So, what moment did you know that you were going to be a professional musician? Was it before high school then, or in high school?
No, it was actually before, even before I joined the band. I really thought I was a pretty decent pianist. I really thought that I was going to be a concert pianist. And I was playing all the recitals and performing in public very regularly. That was yet another thing that Ms. Marchman did for me. Lots of performance opportunities. I really thought I was going to be a professional pianist. Then I joined the band. And I wasn't quite sure. I didn't know that I was going to end up being a band conductor. What I did know at a very early age, within just a couple of years, is that I was going to write, and band was going to be a medium for me. I had a band director. I started with a gentleman by the name of Bob Tillery. I had some really wonderful teachers, Alec McRae, but there was a teacher, and I just a couple of days ago, I had a chance to see him at the Alabama Music Educators Association. His name is Dr. Clifford M. Winter, and I was so fortunate to be able to give both him and his wife, Susie, a big hug and thank them once again for everything they've done for me. He's the guy that really said, "Hey, Robert, why don't you write it? Hey, hey, Mr. Winter, can we play this? Great, Robert, you write it." And so he gave me the opportunity. I did, and he played everything I ever wrote for the band. And I was so very fortunate to have that particular experience. In other words, band was a unbelievably creative, nurturing environment for me, not just as a performer, but also as a creator. And I have Dr. Winter to thank for that.
A lot of the composers who come on the show have similar stories of high school or middle school directors who let them write for the band and they played their music. Now, not necessarily in concert, but they at least read through things and gave them feedback.
Yes, yes. Dr. Winter, however, I will say, boy, talk about a brave man. He, I would write and we would read it, but I still remember the first, it was actually an arrangement that I did of a Christmas favorite, and he actually programmed it on the concert. And boy, what an amazing moment that was. And then I began to write regularly for the concert band. I also began to arrange for the marching band and start working on marching band shows and performance. And that was another aspect of this that was very powerful, particularly when it came down to hopefully writing something that the audience was going to respond to. And so I owe him the world.
So where did you end up going to college after high school?
I went to Troy State University. Now that's called Troy University. And full circle, that's where I'm a professor of music now at Troy University. So I teach where I went to school.
Yeah, I was about to say that. So you're back home. You're within, I don't know, what is it, 100 miles of where you grew up?
I am actually, as the crow flies, about 30 minutes. As the car drives, I'm about 45 minutes from where I was born. And so it is full circle. And so I went to Troy State University. This is actually, I'm in my third time at Troy. I was there as an undergrad. I was there in the late 90s, early 2000s as director of bands. And now I'm back as a teacher, professor, teaching music industry, which is composition, songwriting, publishing, recording production, things along those lines. And I just love it here. What a wonderful place.
So I want to talk about what happened after college. So did you get a music ed degree or a composition degree?
My undergrad is in music education. What is interesting, I was looking at a number of different universities, including some ivory tower type conservatories. Mm-hmm. However, we would go and listen to the band at Troy while I was a high school student. We listened to them regularly, and the band played well. Dr. John Eblong created something very, very special here. And what an amazing man. What an incredible teacher. Dr. Long today is 94 years old and is still mentoring countless numbers of teachers and young musicians, even at this age in his life. And I owe him the world. With that in mind, however, he brought the world to Troy, Alabama. If you can't get these rural kids out, why not bring the world to these rural kids? And he brought in one gentleman in particular. His name was Dr. Paul Yoder. And those of you that know band from particularly the 50s, 60s, and 70s would probably know the name Yoder, Dr. Paul Yoder. Incredible teacher, incredible composer, arranger. And he looked at my materials when I was a young child, a young kid. I was in high school, brought in my portfolio, and I can still remember him saying, Robert, yeah, you're going to be able to do this. You can do this. You can write. He said, but I'm going to suggest that you start writing for music education. I'm going to suggest you start writing for kids, learn the educational and pedagogical sequence that would be appropriate for them, and then you and your music grow. Start at the bottom and work your way to the top. He said, if you write for the ivory tower, you may get heard. You may have your music heard. If you write for the educational marketplace, as long as it's pedagogically sound, chances are your music will get performed and you'll be able to grow at a much faster rate. I took his advice. I ended up going to Troy to study with him and play in Dr. Long's band, and best decision I ever made. And the rest for me, that set the foundation for me and the rest of my life, because very shortly after I graduated from Troy, I was a published composer.
So let's talk about that period then. That's a remarkable story, and I know that it's a little bit different than what a lot of young composers experience, that not trying to chase a composition degree, but committing to the music ed degree, and learning that craft of being a teacher so that you could be better as a composer of that music. And so I want to talk about your first job then after you left Troy, after you graduated.
Okay. I'll have to amend that. I'll have to amend my answer ever so slightly. The reason was I was a band director before I graduated. Here in Troy, there is a private school, the Pike Liberal Arts School. And my last 2 years of my undergraduate degree, they needed a band director. Thank goodness I owe the world to Delaney Kervin, the administrator at that school. But for whatever the reason, he hired me. So here I am. I am in my final 2 years of my undergraduate degree, but I was over at the local private school, and I was over there for several hours a day, and I conducted the band. I was the director of the band, taught 2 band classes, taught beginning band, and then I'll call it the school band. Once beginners played at a certain level, then they were able to join the school band. So that school band consisted of middle school and high school students together. Again, it was a small private school. What that did for me, however, particularly when I was having to program the school band, it forced me in the most beautiful way to learn that every child there, every student in that band was a unique individual, and they had a unique individual skill set. I had to write. There was no published music that would actually fit that group. So I had to write for that very small ensemble, and I had to write for each and every individual student, making sure that what I gave them was appropriate in their development, appropriate for them pedagogically to move to the next level, teach the skills and concepts it would take for them to move to that next level, but at the same time had to work in one homogeneous arrangement. That particular experience was groundbreaking for me. And now in my 61 years of life, I look back on it, my senior years, look back and realize how important that was. With that, I graduated with my undergraduate degree, and ended up taking a position in Tampa Bay, Florida, in Pinellas County, and started at Pinellas Park High School. From there, I had a pretty fair-sized band, really wonderful students, and moved into a more traditional setting, but started, of course, writing for that band on a regular basis, as well as programming a lot of published material, and wasn't inhibited by instrumentation. So it allowed me to grow in other ways, even beyond what I was able to do at Pike Liberal Arts.
And at Pinellas Park High School, you had quite a successful program. And I know those were also the years with Suncoast Sound.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I was involved in drum corps. I took the job at Pinellas Park. The gentleman who had started Suncoast Sound, Robert Cotter Sr., gave me a buzz. I was actually replacing at Pinellas Park High School. Pinellas Park was a school a new school that had just been built that had divided Largo High School. Largo was a very, very large school, had a very large band program. And Robert Cotter Sr. was the director of the band at Largo High School. And then Robert Cotter Jr. took the position at Pinellas Park High School. By the way, the Largo band was a pretty exceptional group and pretty exceptional program. Some very, very, very fine musicians came out of that program. One that you may know is one of our composer arranger colleagues, and that's Jay Bocook. Jay Bocook came out of the Largo High School band. He was the drum major at Largo High School. And so it was a pretty significant program. With that in mind, Robert Cotter Jr. took a teaching position at a university in Louisiana. So he had left. So I came in and was his replacement. Cotter Sr. gave me a call, said, "Hey, we've just started Suncoast Sound. Would you be interested in working with us and joining the staff?" I said, "Absolutely." So I moved down to Tampa Bay earlier in the summer than I probably would have, and then went on tour with the Suncoast Sound, which was not a traditional drum corps tour. 1979, we hopped on a plane and we spent a month in Europe, performing in Europe, in England, specifically at the Royal Tournament, which is a large military tattoo and a large military production and exhibition. And what a great experience that was. So that started my career with Suncoast Sound, and I stayed with them literally through the next decade.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those were some great years for that drum corps. I don't know a lot about that. I'm not a big DCI guy, but I mean, can you kind of talk a little bit more about what that experience was like down there?
Absolutely. Suncoast Sound was very unique. It was not what we would call a traditional drum corps. Most of the students, most of the members of that corps came from the local high schools. And so we were able to teach and rehearse in different ways. Suncoast Sound finally made, or not finally, they did it pretty quickly, but they made finals at the DCI championship in Miami. And they did extremely well. When Suncoast Sound first started in 79, they went to DCI. They were 40th place, if you want to measure in numbers. The next year was 30th place. The next year was 21st place. The next year was 13th. And then they ended up 6th in 1983. So it was a pretty rapid rise. Even with the brass section that played in 1983. It was a very fine brass line. I'd encourage your listeners maybe to go and take a listen to that, and then really realize there were only 6 to 8 members of that brass section that were over 18. Everybody else was still in high school, basically. So we were able to rehearse every single Saturday. We rehearsed on Wednesday nights, and then we had the traditional once-a-month camp. So we rehearsed more than maybe other corps of the time, but it was done from a educationally sound perspective with high school kids who were totally committed. And that, again, enhanced my teaching experience and my teaching opportunities to the nth degree, of which I am very, very thankful for each and every student that shared their time and talent with me during my years at Suncoast.
Yeah, and speaking of those students, aren't there some well-known people who were in the corps at that time?
Oh, yes, very much so. The amount of incredible talent that came out of that corps is nothing short of remarkable. It's impossible to name them all, but let me just give a few that maybe your listeners would know. One of the finer band programs, in my opinion, in the United States of America is Tarpon Springs. The director of bands there is Kevin Ford. Kevin Ford started with me when he was 11 years old and stayed. I was also his high school band director. He went to Pinellas Park, but he stayed and was a member of Suncoast. So he was a student of mine up through age 21. And he's done incredibly well. What the program he's built is nothing short of remarkable. Mike Roylance, the principal tubist in the Boston Symphony Orchestra, was a tuba player in Suncoast. Larry Clark, well-known composer, now publisher with his own company, Excelsia. Larry Clark was my drum major. He was a very, very fine brass player from Newport Richey and came down and joined the Corps, became the drum major, and the rest is history. So I could continue with many more, but those are just three that I suspect that most of your listeners would know.
It's a pretty impressive story, and so even someone like me, who's not involved in DSA, has never been. I know about Suncoast Sound. It's like one of those legends in the band community, I guess.
Oh, well, thank you. I was so fortunate. A lot of it, and I do want to point out that Corps was built by band directors. It was a group of basically local band directors that put all that together. One of my dearest friends in the world is Frank Williams. He's in the DCI Hall of Fame. He was a band director at Boca Ciega and spent his entire career at Boca Ciega High School there in Pinellas County. And to this day, he is still teaching. He's retired from the public school system, but he was this gifted teacher that was part of that legacy. John Fulton, Jeff Davis, Greg Martin, who teaches at Westchester University. Greg Martin was part of that. And the list goes on and on and on. Just amazing. It was rare that we had somebody that was not a band director. We had personalities like Michael Rayford, Carl Lowe, incredible visual minds that have done amazing things in our visual world. But most of the staff literally were band directors.
So, Robert, how long were you at Pinellas Park?
I started there in 1979, and I literally was there right at 3 years. And then I stayed in Pinellas County, but then I moved to Clearwater High School. That was a school just a bit north of Pinellas Park, and by a bit, I mean about 5 miles north. And so Pinellas County is a very large county. So I stayed at Clearwater High School, and then from there left and went to work for Columbia Pictures Publications.
Now, how did you end up teaching? Can you kind of connect the dots for me a little bit? You ended up at James Madison teaching. How did you get from Clearwater High School up to James Madison? I'm missing something in your story.
Through Drum Corps, I got my first publishing opportunity in 1983 at the DCI event in DCI Championship in Miami. A gentleman by the name of Jack Bullock was in the audience. Jack Bullock was one of the administrators, an incredible teacher, incredible writer, composer, but he was working for Columbia Pictures Publications. And he heard and saw the group Suncoast Sound and literally came down and found me and said, "Hey, I really would like to talk to you." 2 weeks later, after that event, I was on a plane. I was sitting in Miami with Jack Bullock and the president of Columbia Pictures Publications. Your listeners would know that president as Frank J. Hackinson. Now put that into publishing terms, that's FJH Music. And so Jack Bullock and Frank Hackinson gave me my first break in the publishing world. I am eternally grateful to both Frank Hackinson and Jack Bullock, two great gentlemen. And I'm dearest of friends with Frank, and I'm dearest of friends with Jack Bullock. And truth be known, Jack is a second father to me. And I don't like Jack. I love Jack, and so I can never repay him. With that, that connection was made. I started while I was teaching at Clearwater High School, writing for Columbia Pictures Publications, but we were successful enough to where they had a position come open, and they needed somebody that had an editorial position come open, and asked me if I would be interested in that editorial position. And as a result, yes, I took it, and that made the jump into, pardon me, that made the jump into the publishing world. While I was working at Columbia Pictures Publications, I got a call from a gentleman in Virginia. His name is Dr. Pat Rooney. And Pat was, at that time, was the director of bands at James Madison University. he had known my work through Suncoast Sound and was looking for somebody to write for his college band. I was very happy and honored to do so and started writing for James Madison. Very shortly thereafter, we ended up using James Madison as a demo recording group. And that was good for James Madison. It was good for us. And that was for marching band publications. And that worked out very, very well. So I got, I'll call it, in the James Madison community. And then at a time, it was actually 1990, when they had a position come open, a music industry position. They needed somebody to be able to come up and teach publishing and recording and things along those lines. And so they gave me a call to see if I would be interested in interviewing for the position. I was, and it was a good time in my life to take that. So that made my jump into higher education, and that started in the summer of 1990.
So can you tell me about that position up at James Madison? What were you doing up there?
I was working in the music industry program at James Madison. I had a colleague, Donna Gilliam, and they hired both of us at the same time. And our job was to teach music professionals who were going into the industry. That's a very, very important endeavor because it does require a teacher. It's not just somebody who maybe has some experience in the industry. If we're going to be nurturing young professional minds, they have to be taught in a pedagogically sound way. So I was really able, in my opinion, to capitalize on my music ed experience and bring that into that particular program. So I taught everything from songwriting, film scoring, writing for advertising, composition. I taught studio production, music technology based courses, some music business courses, et cetera, et cetera. With that in mind, I had some fairly significant students that came through that particular program who your listeners would know. I still remember the day I had this band director from Maryland come into my office and bring his 18-year-old son. His 18-year-old son was named Brian, or is named Brian, and the director from Maryland was Mr. Balmages. And so young Brian Balmages came into my office, and his father said, "Okay, son, here we go. This is where you're at if you want to do this. This is where the place to be." And so I spent 4 years with Brian Balmages as an example. On the orchestral side of the fence, coming in as a freshman with Brian was a young Soon Hee Newbold, and she has been incredibly successful. Both Brian and Soon Hee have been very successful. Full circle, Brian, upon his graduation, ended up going to the University of Miami and going into the same program that I did. I got my to go back and patch together a couple of years there. I stayed with Columbia Pictures up through basically the beginning of through mid 1988. I then decided that I was going to go ahead and get my graduate degree. And I was living in Miami, and I wanted to go to University of Miami, and I wanted to study in Alfred Reed's program. So I went in and went into the music industry program, of which Alfred Reed was a part of it. And I studied. My principal teachers were Jim Progress and Alfred Reed. And what a wonderful experience that was. Now, fast forward, now I'm at James Madison. Brian is graduating. Brian decided to go ahead and take the same path that I did, and he went to the University of Miami. That was a very good call on his part. Got a great education there, studying with really wonderful teachers. He spent quite a bit of time with Gary Green, a well-known conductor there, and it just worked out beautifully. At the same time, Frank Hackinson gave me a call and said, "Hey, Robert, I'm looking for a young writer." Literally, he said, "Robert, I'm looking for you. I'm looking for somebody just like you when you were 22, 23. Who would you know?" And I gave him Brian's name. And Frank did a wonderful job of nurturing Brian's talent. Brian did an incredible job fulfilling his potential, and the proof is clearly in the pudding. Brian has done very well in his career, not only as a composer, but also as a conductor, clinician, and a publisher in all of his work. And he now continues his work in nurturing young writers and developing a large concert band catalog.
Yeah, was Rob Romaine at James Madison when you were there?
Rob was not there while I was there. Rob uh, got his master's degree at James Madison, but he had left just before I got there. Rob's a very gifted man. I actually had known Rob, however, because Rob is from Pinellas County, Florida. And so while I was teaching at Pinellas Park in Clearwater, I had gotten to know Rob. And Rob also, while I was working at Columbia Pictures, had actually sent some charts for consideration. And Rob, while he was doing that, Rob his charts he had sent were featuring the James Madison Band, which helped cement that communication or that connection with James Madison in terms of the recording. It's funny how things work out in life. Then later on, fast forward, I started working with the C.L. Barnhouse Company in the mid 2000s, first decade of the 2000s, and Rob was a composer there. So he and I worked together as colleagues, and we've been friends literally now for almost 40 years, or right at 40 years. So that connection goes long and deep.
So I feel like we're burying the lead a little bit here, Robert. It's fascinating to hear the stories of like how all this happened. But what I really want to know is, when did you first have that moment as a composer in the band community where you became the composer that we know today, where you had your first big piece that hit?
Yeah, I started writing very right as I got to Columbia Pictures. I started writing for composing for concert band, and and as a young writer, you're developing and trying to develop a voice, trying to develop a perspective, trying to develop a context, and if it's accepted, then you be developing that branding called a name. However, my first probably very successful work. By successful, I mean one that was accepted and is still widely programmed today. I wrote in 1988. That was a piece that was a project while I was working on my master's degree at the University of Miami. And literally, since I've been working as a band composer, working in a publisher, my professor said to me, Robert, you've got in our program, by the way, which was media writing and production, you had to compose for any and all ensembles. You had to be able to record and produce it, and so we had to do a work for concert band. My professor literally looked at me and said, Robert, look, we know you've got the concert band thing. You've got that experience. Write something that you can publish and make good use of the time, and let's put your focus on the orchestra, which I did not have as much orchestral experience. So I was very happy and thankful for that. So my concert band project was a piece called Encanto. And so Encanto was published in the Hal Leonard catalog, Music Works catalog, and I am very thankful for the nurturing and the care and feeding that Hal Leonard has given that piece over all these years. So here we are, 31 years after the publication later, and it is still here, and I'm very thankful for that.
So we're in the late 80s, the early 90s. And so what happened next as far as your career? So you had stopped teaching at this point. You were at James Madison. Did you move? You moved on. And so how did your career develop at that point to where you are now, to sort of the maturity of your career?
Well, the late 80s, again, 88, 89, I graduated the spring of 90 with my master's degree from the University of Miami. From there, very shortly after graduation, I took that position at James Madison. I stayed at James Madison for 7 years. And so I was there 90 to the spring of 97. Significant time for me, great teaching. My composition career, not being the band director, although I did conduct a symphonic band James Madison University in the last half of my tenure at JMU. But because I was not the band director and focused on music industry, it allowed me time to write and develop a voice, and with that, I hopefully developed my style, the things that maybe people gravitated towards. So that's when things like The Tempest and Into the Storm. That's when The Divine Comedy was written. So I was finding my voice at that time. At the same time, I also met my wife, And she was a JMU grad and a young teacher in the state. And so we got married in 1992. My children were born there in Harrisonburg, Virginia, in 94, 95. And so those were significant times. 97, Dr. John M. Long was retiring after 33 years at Troy State University. And I got a call from a member of the Alumni Association who said, "Hey, would you maybe consider applying for this particular position?" I said, I would be happy to. It worked out well because I had some health issues with my parents. And so it got me closer to home and able to help take care of parents and family. And so I applied for the position and was granted the director of bands position at Troy State University. Now it's called Troy University. That name change happened about 6, 7, 8 years later. So I became the director of bands at Troy State University and spent actually 4 years in that position before going back full time into publishing with Warner Brothers Publications.
So, Robert, that brings us up to today. And I know that you were with Barnhouse for a long time, but now you have your own publishing company. And so do you want to tell everybody about RWS Music?
Oh, absolutely. I've got my own catalog now, RWS Music Company. This has been a labor of love and something that I'm trying to build very slowly and strategically for a long-term future. The company started with just my writing. I wanted to make sure that we had everything in place and everything was working, and then started to bring in other very gifted writers, including Mark Connor here in this conversation. The company is of a different model. We use a distribution model, so we are distributed exclusively by the C.L. Barnhouse Company in Oskaloosa, Iowa. And my relationship with Barnhouse began January 1st of 2006. I was with Warner Brothers for a long time, and literally basically 16 years. And then Warner went through a corporate merger, change, acquisition, and became part of Alfred Publishing. And then as shortly after Alfred Publishing was in control of Warner Brothers, I received this offer to go work with C.L. Barnhouse. And it was one of those offers that was very, very attractive to me. And so I started in January 1st of 2006 with C.L. Barnhouse, working in product development and working as a concert band editor and developing new series for them, and ultimately becoming a vice president with the company. That lasted until 2015 when I started my own catalog. My relationship with Barnhouse is very strong. The Barnhouse Company is a very, very solid sound company that has been with us in our profession for a very long time. In fact, if my memory is correct, it's America's second oldest publisher. They've been in business since 1886. And so now I run RWS Music Company, distributed exclusively by the C.L. Barnhouse Company. In RWS Music Company, we're working on pedagogically sound materials that connect with both the musician and the audience. And we've got a catalog now, 128 works that are in the country. Just finished recording another 38 works that'll be adding to that particular catalog. And so hopefully your listeners will go and take a listen to the material. You can find us through your major music dealer, your local music dealer. You also can find us at rwsmusic.com. And go and I encourage you to go and peruse the music and hopefully find something that connects with you, your students, and ultimately your audience.
Robert, so I'm going to take off my composer hat for a moment, and I'm going to put on my band director hat for a second. And I'm going to ask you a question that band directors are often wanting to ask publishers, and that's why can't we copy parts for our kids, especially the younger kids? Great
question. The part copying issue is one that's very complex. First off, I think that all listeners need to know that we need, in my opinion, that we need to abide by the copyright law. The copyright law vests each copyright owner with 6 exclusive rights. Some people refer to them as the bundle of rights. And one of those is to make copies. And so, unless you have permission from the publisher, that it is illegal to make those copies. And so, for me, I think that first and foremost, as teachers, we need to make sure that we're abiding by the law and that we're teaching our students to abide by the law. If we abide by the law and then we have some issues, then let's work together between publisher and consumer, and let's work to change laws to make everything work. The copyright law, by the way, I find that most of our constituents and colleagues might not know exactly how long the copyright law has been in existence in the United States of America. The very first copyright law was part of our original Constitution and was passed in 1790. So the right to copy is an exclusive right that stays vested with the publishers. Please understand that the technology to copy is still fairly new. How long really have we had copy machines that were viable in order to be able to do that? That's happened in my teaching career. So it's still fairly new. For a younger director, maybe somebody in their 20s, 30s, copying technology they've always had it. So they may not really understand that it is still fairly new. We also have to understand that copying affects not just the publisher, it's affected by a very large distribution system that is still in place. And so we have partnerships with local music dealers. And these local music dealers are the ones that are responsible for getting copies of the music legally into our school systems. And the moment we start copying, we're not just taking away from the composer and the publisher, we're also taking away from that local music dealer. I think that some of your listeners may not understand that the educational music business runs, speaking in business terms, on very thin margins. In other words, there's not a lot of profit inside this. There's not a lot of profit. It looks like the music is expensive. It's not. And the price point continues to edge up because printing is expensive. All you got to do is go down and buy ink at your local store and understand the cost of ink. We use offset printing presses, and then we've graduated now to digital printing presses, and we're trying to bring that cost down. But every time somebody copies a part, it actually hurts in such a way where sales of that chart goes down, and then the next chart has got to be priced just a little bit higher. I tell my students in a music industry program here at Troy University that when somebody goes to a store and steals something, if you have a shoplifter that steals something, that loss factor is factored into the overhead cost of that store. And then they have to turn around and put that on top of the cost of the goods. And it's actually the honest buying public that pays for the loss there. I think it's important for us to understand that we're part of a much larger system here, that I think that, one, we have to abide by the law so that we can change the law to make it work for everybody. And finally, I want to encourage all of our music educators to value what we teach. Please value what we teach. We're there to teach the music. We're teaching through the music. We're teaching the music. Why should the music be free? The music, just like any other textbook, requires some capital outlay on behalf of the school system. So I want to encourage each of our teachers to really look at that very carefully. I think that some teachers may copy out of convenience. I think that some may copy out of maybe a misconception that textbook money must come out of just their regular operating budget. But no, these are our textbooks that we use in classrooms, and our school system is responsible for providing those textbooks. I'll stop there and let you respond to some of that because that's a long diatribe of information. But we could continue.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just going to play the devil's advocate because as a composer, as someone who is published with your company, this matters to me that we observe copyright laws. But I'm going to play the devil's advocate just to do it for the sake of the interview. And so what if I was to say, well, I teach fourth graders. They destroy their parts so quickly that I can't possibly keep up with that. What would you say to that?
I understand that and I empathize. But Mark, fourth graders lose their tennis shoes. All you got to do is walk into any classroom and you see shoes that are left and lost every time you clean up. I'm wondering if it's Nike's responsibility to replace the tennis shoes.
Right. That's a good answer. Yeah, Robert, you do realize I'm playing the devil's advocate. I'm on your side.
I understand completely. And this kind of dialogue is really important.
Right.
Because, let me play devil's advocate for a second.
Sure.
We in our print publishing industry, we have instrumentation, kind of a standard average instrumentation. However, there are schools that maybe have a larger number in one section than we have printed legally inside that part set that they produced. And so, for the director to do that legally, they should buy another complete set. I really honestly believe that we need to offer at a reasonable price point individual parts that would allow that teacher to buy one full part set plus 4 other alto sax parts if they need it.
Yeah, I guess maybe that's my next question then. There's some disruptors in the industry right now. Some independent composers, of course, have always existed, but there's some companies and consortiums that are allowing people to copy parts and print on demand. Is there any movement in the traditional publishing companies to go to a print on demand model for a fee or something along those lines?
The publishers, I can speak to my company, Arduous. I can speak based upon my association with the C.L. Barnhouse Company with a large digital press. They have a state-of-the-art digital press sitting there. We can print on demand. However, it's the delivery of individual parts. So it's not just publishers, it's the distribution system that becomes really important. For example, to get three extra parts, and you want to get that from your local music dealer. Think about the shipping costs of those parts, and the mailing, the FedExing, et cetera, et cetera. Now a band that needs a lot of extra parts throughout each section, it makes perfect sense just to buy 2 sets. That makes perfect sense.
It makes sense to me, too, thinking about it, because the publishing companies aren't like Amazon, where they can sort of absorb the cost of those free shippings. Correct.
And Amazon really doesn't absorb the cost. Amazon takes it, and that's an overhead cost that gets a part of their overhead expense that gets layered and added to every product they sell. We still pay for that. It's just guised. It's like going to the cleaners. You come home with wire coat hangers. You think those are free, but no, it's built into the cost of the cleaning.
Right. They're hidden taxes, like a lot of things.
Correct.
Yeah. I don't think I talk about it enough on the show because it's not really the point, but I know that it's a passion of yours, so I wanted to ask you. So I appreciate you taking the time to do that.
One other thing I would like to add, I've been presenting copyright sessions with 2 very cherished colleagues. We did a session at the Midwest Clinic a few years ago. We've been in multiple states, and we're addressing copyright from the perspective of a teacher, a publisher, composer, and a lawyer. And so Barry Morgan is the Solicitor General in Cobb County, Georgia. Which means he would be the attorney general of sorts in that particular area. That's the Atlanta, Georgia area, major metropolitan area. Barry's had a long and distinguished career, a very successful career in the law, but 30 plus years ago, he was a high school band director. And so he's still very much involved in music education. He's on the board for Music for All. He works with DCI. He's working with local bands. Just a wonderful man. David Starnes is the director, director of the athletic band, the wonderful Western Carolina University band in Cullowhee, North Carolina. So David, Barry, and I go in and do a presentation. And that presentation is to discuss copyright from our three distinctly different perspectives. We represent each of those perspectives. So I would like to, if your listeners are interested, please feel free to contact us through any number of resources. You can get me through rwsmusic.com and just send us a note. And if we can work it out in the schedule to come and present at your state MEA and discuss copyright, we are very happy to do so. We think it is a pro bono effort minus expenses. It's a pro bono effort, and it is something that I think is very, very important. It's only through meaningful dialogue, understanding, and us working together that we can make this copyright situation work for everybody.
So, Robert, we know you as a composer, and we know that you have your history as a teacher and all this stuff. But I also know you personally, and I know that you have two daughters who are now music educators. And here's what I want to know. I usually ask my guests what advice they would give for my listeners. I want to know, what advice did you give your daughters as they started in their careers as music educators?
Great question. Great question. My oldest daughter is Savannah. So Savannah Smith Cole. We're so thankful and thrilled. She got married back in May to a wonderful young teacher. His name is Will Cole. He's from the Atlanta area, Woodstock specifically. She's the band director at Jacksonville High School in Jacksonville, Alabama. She's in her third year right now. My youngest daughter, Madison, just started her first teaching position. She graduated back in May with her music ed degree, and she's teaching coincidentally in Pinellas County, Florida, in Largo, Florida. She's the choir and musical theater director at Largo Middle School, and she's literally just 2 to 3 miles from where I really began my career 40 years ago, and she started almost 40 years to the day there. So that's an interesting coincidence in life. With that in mind, we share with our daughters. My wife, Susan, is a truly wonderful master teacher. She was a very successful band director for many, many years. She served as a general music teacher and orchestra director. She taught choir. She taught all the different music classrooms, but she spent many years as a band director, which is home for her. She's now teaches music ed at Troy University, same institution that I teach at. So when we are mentoring our daughters, it's a we situation because both of their parents are music educators. One, to quote my mother-in-law, Alta Sue Hawkins, teach for the long haul. This is not about just getting the superior rating. It's not about winning the trophy at the contest. We're talking about teaching for the long haul. We're talking ultimately about our goal in making sure that our students are musicians for life. And I think it's really important to recognize that the word musician can manifest itself in so many ways. Yes, it's great to have a professional musician. When I sit there and I realize I have that high school kid, Mike Roylance, and I sit there and I listen to him play with the Boston Symphony now, what a wonderful, wonderful thing that is, and it's really wonderful. But the large majority of the students in our classroom are not going to be professional musicians. However, I think it's really important that we as teachers make music an important, integral part of their life, whether they're going to continue as music makers, and I hope that they do. Hopefully they'll leave our public schools and go on and play in college. Hopefully from there they'll play in community groups, community bands. What a vibrant, wonderful opportunity there. Our students also are going to be music and arts supporters for life. And it is our responsibility to make sure, again, we're teaching for that long haul so that we're growing and developing the environment for effective arts and arts education for the future. That's probably my number one. Second, I would also advise my daughters that, there's more than one way. My grandfather on the other side, he called me Sonny Boy. Sonny Boy, there's more than one way to skin the cat. There's more than one way to do things. And really great master teachers there are multiple ways of knowing and doing, multiple ways. And so we may have our primary way, a way that we think is going to work, but we've got to have two, three, four more strategies in our toolkit that we can take out and implement at any given time. So we have to make sure that we're teaching all of those students in all of the appropriate ways, knowing there are differentiated learners in that classroom. And we have to decide what is our effective goal when it's done. I believe it's music for life. And combined with that music for life, our students have got to learn to express themselves through the universal language of music. It's got to be a language for them. That means they've got to be able to, yes, speak, but they've also got to be able to create. They've got to be able to use the language of music to express themselves, not just read, Mark, your and my expression that happens to be on that published page. So again, total comprehensive musicianship for life. That, in my opinion, is our primary goal.
You know, it's so interesting to watch your daughters, as you know, every year come into Midwest and to sort of talk to Savannah and see how she's doing and to hear their story and to think about what they have as parents as far as music educators. I feel gifted as a teacher because my father taught for 54 years. My mother was a science teacher. You know, I had my parents every day to kind of like go to and say, so this happened, and they would either give me advice or just simply say it's going to happen. And it was such an anchor for me as a young teacher.
It's an amazing way for parents to connect with their children and vice versa. I'm honored now to call both my daughters colleagues, and to be able to speak at a different level with them professionally. What a wonderful gift that is.
What would you say to a young teacher out there who maybe doesn't feel that support, who's maybe struggling and feels like this is overwhelming? Do you have any words for them?
Absolutely. There are any number of resources, but the two primary words are reach out. There are so many people that are willing to help. There are so many people that are willing to mentor. I can just about promise any young teacher out there that any hurdle that you may be facing, any speed bump you may be going over right now, is not going to be brand new. It has happened before. And there are wonderful, gifted master teachers that are willing to share their experience and their knowledge with each and every young teacher. And that is part of the ongoing development of the teaching profession. But we must reach out.
That's why I do this show, to be honest.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think it's important for your listeners. You do this show and you talk on a very personal level, and you're talking, with the exception of this interview, you're talking with really amazingly talented people, Mark. And so you know, an opportunity to hear those very talented people be very human and to show their passion and compassion for music and music education.
Robert, one last question before we get to the final questions here. And in the spirit of kind of showing our vulnerability as teachers, do you remember a moment where you felt overwhelmed or you made a mistake that you learned from and grew from in your career as a teacher?
Oh, yes. So many times. One of the great things about teaching is you truly are a student of life. But it could be from the moment where maybe I didn't handle or I didn't recognize a student and their particular situation, and I maybe handled that incorrectly. I learned, moments where that student comes up and they've got a problem. And in this particular case, this particular moment, the student wasn't truthful and forthcoming for a very good reason. They weren't truthful and forthcoming about why they had this particular problem, why they were going to miss this band practice, and they weren't in a position to comfortably share with me. And at that moment, that situation played itself out, I realized that I had to go back to my roots. I had to go back to Pike Liberal Arts School, and I had to get to know each and every child in that band and know them as a person and an individual, so that in Pike Liberal Arts, so I could write music for them individually, individual parts that are going to work together as one arrangement. But in this particular case, I had to know them so that they would feel comfortable coming and talking to me in the most, I'll call it honest and forthcoming way, and not feel like they have to hide certain situations. In other words, teachers, let's make connections with our students.
Yeah, I mean, that student who doesn't come to class with reads every day or, forgets his instrument once a week, there's probably something there that's beyond, your inconvenience as a teacher.
I was reminded at a reunion of one of my bands from way back when recently. And I had a gentleman, former student, just really wonderful person, and spent years with me. And he came up and we're sitting there talking privately, and he was thanking me for being the rock in his life, the reason that he came to school. So I'm listening, and I'm of course very, very honored that he would speak. But then he shared, and what I didn't know was that his parents had thrown him out of the house, and he was actually living on the school property in unused athletic facilities, out of season athletic facilities. And he was literally living there, getting out, going into the athletic room, taking a shower, and coming to class. And all these years later, I'm thankful that the band and my classroom was his safe place. But I really, really chastised myself for not making that personal connection, to have him be able to share that with me at the time. Talk about decades later and learning that, oh my goodness, what a wake up.
Yeah, we don't know which student, the only reason they come to school every day is because they want to be in the band. We don't know what student that is. We just don't know. Yeah, it speaks to what we do as teachers as being bigger than ourselves, being bigger than the moment itself. It's about teaching that human being that's in our classroom.
Absolutely.
I said it in my talk at Midwest. It's not about teaching the content. It's about teaching the kids.
Exactly. Yep. We are all teachers. We teach through music, and we're responsible for perpetuating the art of music, but we are using music for something that is greater than ourselves. And it's an important part of that human condition.
Hey there, everyone. My name is Ann Molesky, and I'm the host of the Anna Krusick Podcast, another podcast in the Muted Network. It's my mission to help music teachers be more purposeful, sequential, and joyful in each and everything they do as teacher musicians. Join me every Thursday as I share tips, tricks, and meaningful conversations with other music teachers about how to make the general music classroom more intentional and impactful for both you and your students.
All right, Robert, let's get on to these final questions here. I ask these of all my guests. They're big questions. You can sort of answer them as you will. And the first of these is, where do you draw the line between healthy and unhealthy competition in music?
For me, I've had bands, and my bands have competed. I did drum corps. We competed. However, when the objective becomes to win the trophy, we're over the line. The competition is simply an opportunity and a benchmark to help identify our students' achievement. And we're moving against a standard. We're not moving against somebody else. We're not competing against somebody else. If we happen to place higher than another group and we're happy about it, it's only because we have so much admiration and respect for their musical abilities and their musical performance. The moment it becomes about something other than our students that are in front of us, then it is way over the line.
So, Robert, this is a question that I find really interesting with you, because you've told me some things about composing in the car on your way to work and this sort of thing. But how have you managed to find a work-life balance in your career?
Great question. I tell my students now that I don't have a job, I have a life. And so my students, the composers that I work with, the publishing company, it's part of my life. That works for me specifically because also my wife and my daughters are also part of this very same profession. And so they understand that. So we are able to balance family within this music ed community. And so I realize I'm very fortunate there. However, with the exception of being father and husband, the most important role in my life is being a teacher. But I can never forget that father and husband are my most important roles in life. And if I was not able to connect my job or my work with my family, then I would have to make other arrangements. But the balance that I achieve is because my family's in the same profession, and we approach everything as part of our life.
Robert, what do you see as the big challenges facing music education? And do we have any thoughts about how we can meet those challenges?
I think our biggest challenges center in continuing relevance of our music education programs in our students and our community's lives. What do I mean by that? We're not extracurricular. In my estimation, we should be the keystone of the education curriculum. In the arts classrooms, we're the only place where we're teaching creativity. The number one characteristic that Fortune 500 companies are looking for out of their employees is creativity. This is what we have. These are our resources. This is what we want to do. How do we make this happen? And so making sure that we are not just reactive. I think as music educators, we must be proactive to make sure that we keep our programs relevant within our communities, making sure they see the worth of arts education, music education in our students' lives and our communities' lives. And that goes much beyond just getting a trophy at the marching or concert festival on the weekend. It's got to be how we're impacting those students. That means that we've got to reach out in different ways. I think that we've got to be very creative ourselves at making sure that we're looking outside our traditional box to find ways to connect our programs to our students' daily lives and our community each and every day. If we do that, then things like funding will never be in question. Right now, we're continually challenged with funding, and that's only because people think that we're extracurricular. That shows that we still have connective opportunities that are before us that we need to take advantage of.
All right, Robert, this is my favorite question that I ask every week. And if I could give you a time machine and set it to the day of your high school graduation, what would you tell yourself?
That's a great question. That's kind of a tough question, simply because I would tell myself so much. We don't have time in this interview. Of course, I'm looking back with some senior eyes right now. But I'm graduating high school, young, vim, vinegar in the veins, et cetera, et cetera. I'm going into music and music education. First thing I tell myself is, it's not about you. I don't care what area of music you're going into. It's not about you. If you're a music educator, it's about your students. It's about your students' success. You live through their success. If you're the professional musician, it's not about you. It's not about how well you play. It's about your audience and how they perceive this artistic statement. Can you move them? Can you make them cry? Can you make them laugh? Can you make them shout with glee? Can you quiet them to where they are even afraid to breathe? Can we use that music to affect that audience? It's not about you.
Robert, if you could plan it out, what would be the final work for wind ensemble or orchestra or anything that you'd like to conduct or hear or perform, and why?
Well, great question. It would be my hope that it's something I haven't written yet, and hopefully I'll continue to write and grow as I continue my life journey here. So hopefully it'll be something that would be the sum total. It actually, you asked about my upbringing. When I turned 40, my mother gave me a great gift. She gave me my sketchbook from when I was 5, 6, and 7 years old, taking piano lessons from Ms. Marchman. And here were these melodies that I had written. And the 40-year-old Robert looks at it and goes, "Wow, okay, yes, there's real melody here. There's phrasing, there's form to this." And I always told myself that when I turn 80, I'd like to take those melodies and create a piece that would reflect an entire lifetime of music. Maybe that'll be the piece, the one I'd like to finally conduct or hear, something that reflects truly one person's lifetime of music.
Robert, if you could direct listeners to one piece of yours, if they'd never heard anything by Robert W. Smith, what piece would that be?
One piece is tough. I'll do two. Can I do two pieces?
Sure.
Okay. I would probably say the Divine Comedy, the four movements of the Divine Comedy, the Inferno, Purgatorio, Ascension, and Paradiso. That, at least at the time it was written, was the sum total of my musical background, and it's still, in my opinion, vibrant today. However, probably the piece I get the greatest satisfaction from is something I wrote for a very young band, beginning band. It's called the Tempest, and I wrote that many, many years ago. Yet it is still being played very much so today. A large part of our American band students over the last 20 plus years have all played the Tempest. And for whatever the reason, students seem to gravitate towards that particular piece. And it speaks to them, and trying to, as I've mentioned several times in this interview, trying to connect with those young musicians, trying to get them really excited about the world of music and the possibilities in the future, seem to have realized itself through the Tempest. I just got back from Alabama Music Education Association, and I was guest conducting on a concert. The middle school band director came up afterwards and was thanking me, which I really appreciated. He said, "But I got to tell you, it was your music, and it was this piece that said, yes, this is what I want to do." And you never really know the impact that a piece of music is going to have on somebody. But what I do know is something like the Tempest has interested students and kept them, or at least encouraged them to stay involved in music.
Yeah, the Tempest is that's a staple of the beginning band curriculum for sure.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Absolutely. It's when I took my job, there was only a couple pieces in the filing cabinet when I got to my current school, and the Tempest was in there. I laughed.
No. How about that? Wonderful.
Yeah. Robert, is there anything coming up that you would like to share or promote?
Well, I just finished recording the concert band portion of the catalog for the RWS Music Company for 2020. There's some wonderful works in there. When they are released, I'd encourage everybody to look at the entire catalog. On a personal note, however, there's a couple of pieces that I would hope that would have some universal appeal throughout our band community. One is going to be a suite called Suite for the Heroes Among Us. And hopefully this is something that could be programmed in every town in the United States. It would be, and it honors our first responders. The first movement is called Fire. That is in print already. It honors our firefighters. It's actually dedicated to my brother-in-law, my wife's brother, who just retired as a battalion chief in the Fairfax County, Virginia Fire Department. The second movement is called HEAL, HEAL, and that is in honor of our medical community, our first responders and our medical community that keep us healthy and safe. I actually dedicated that to three doctors, Dr. Ben Smith, Dr. Wynn Crawford, and Dr. Juan Osorio. As some listening may know, I had 59 years of really incredible healthy life, and I had a little bit of a health hurdle in 2018 into 19. Everything is fine now, but those three doctors literally saved my life. And so when you listen to HEAL, you're actually listening to what I was hearing as I was in an emergency room and passing into the dark beyond. Luckily, they were able to bring me back. So that piece is very special to me. And then the final movement is called To Protect and Serve. And that honors our law enforcement, our law enforcement services that are out there every single day to protect and serve. It's a celebratory, majestic movement to pay tribute to those that put their lives on the line. So I would encourage everybody to look at Suite for the Heroes Among Us. And then finally, one other piece I'd like to highlight for you is going to be a very simple little hymn setting that I just produced. Again, Universal Human Condition. My mother's favorite hymn was a hymn called How Great Thou Art. And How Great Thou Art, beautiful lyrics, but an old Swedish folk tune. So I took that Swedish folk tune and did a hymn setting, and it's simply called A Mother's Hymn. And I know every director, every child out there has got that very special mom in their life that there's opportunities to honor them, whether it's Mother's Day, whether that's in memoriam, whether that's just to say I love you in a very beautiful, elegant way. So I got a little teary-eyed recording that with these incredibly gifted musicians in Washington, D.C., as I was thinking about my mother, Grazia W. Smith. I'm Robert W. Smith. Her name, Grazia, Grazia, which is Italian for thank you. So, Mom, thank you.
What grade level is that, Robert?
That technically on the page it's a 2.5, but musically it's more difficult than that. So I'm going to call it a 3, but it's right in the center.
All right, Robert, how can people get in touch with you?
Best way to get in touch with me, I'm available on all social media, so you can find me there. But the best way is through rwsmusic.com. And you can just send an email through that website and get to me and be happy to hear from you. Excellent.
Robert, thank you so much for your time.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for this entire podcast series, Mark. You and this band podcast has done a great service for our profession, and I know I'm joined by so many listeners and so many other band personalities that you've interviewed. Thank you for what you're doing for our profession.
Oh, thank you.